Okay, in this section, I'm going to show you how I made this sketch. In the production environment, we usually get concepts and references, and maybe you will have a concept in mind already, but in my case, it's just a vague idea. So being able to draw will allow me to get a feel whether or not the composition and design will work out for me. All right, let's look at some references. My idea is to have a bit of a mix of fantasy with real life buildings. So I'm not really going for the historical look, rather make it more fun for a fantasy game. I like to look at references of windows, doors, roofs, materials, carvings, how materials decay, and looking for interesting ornaments as well. For example, I like to see how this window is framed with interesting patterns. I also found references for these columns and how they have some ornaments at the top and in the middle carved in there. As well, it's good to have patterns that will help us during the sculpting process. Usually black and white alphas. It's great to see how buildings are built in real life, how they are joined with wood pieces without the nails. It's pretty amazing. They also have these interesting horses at the top of the buildings and some beautiful carvings. And overall, I've seen concepts referencing from Viking boats, so maybe I will incorporate a bit of that. Who knows? And finally, looking at the correct names and components of a regular house. I used to work in construction, building houses, so for me it's easy to understand how things are built in real life, and it really comes in handy when you're modeling architecture. All right, so the next part I will be using all of these elements to create our sketch. Let's get right into it. Okay, as you can see, I'm in Photoshop right now. I found this beautiful picture of a house with a water wheel. And I'm just going over the house, the picture, and just tracing over all of my ideas. I think it's better this way because you don't have to deal with drawing perspective. And I think that you also are getting rid of all the noise inside the picture. And outlining this way, I think you get a sense of how this building is actually built and what modules and pieces you're going to need for to make this house. It's also perfect because this house is surrounded by some beautiful scenery, and I don't have to worry about what to add to embellish this house. Okay, so at this point, I think I'm just gonna be outlining the drawing, and I think it's a better idea if I speed up the video. Okay, so I guess. I'm gonna be all over the place and just fleshing out these ideas. I think it's better to have, for example, here, maybe I will do some wall just to break the amount of wood material that I have in this house. It's a good way to mix materials. So you always want to incorporate different materials that can help outline, embellish your designs, not just plain wood. I mean, if you're going for the historical, sure, but if you are doing a little bit more fantastical, I think having a mix of metals and stone and wood it will embellish your designs. At this point, I'm just looking at my reference, figuring out what ideas, and as you can see, I brought back the horse, And it's starting to look a bit different than the actual house. I'm adding a window, just checking the shape. Maybe instead of being round, it's semicircle. I also want to maybe mix the patterns. So half of the house is it's got shingles, and the other half is straight lumber. That also breaks the design a little bit, makes it more interesting. So really nothing set in stone yet. I could change the designs as I go. Maybe during modeling, I'll figure I have another ideas. But at least I'm not going empty-handed into modeling and waste all my time figuring out how to model something. Here, I'll just do it in less than a minute. As you can see, I'm pretty much jumping around all over the image as I get an idea. The point is not to stop. It's just keep going. If you don't have an idea yet for a specific area, then you can just jump back into the area you already figured out and just finish it. So my idea was to have geysers around this area. And I think it would be a cool idea to have a water wheel that moves when the geyser shoots up. So I'm going and just sketching out that idea. And I think this is where the fantasy side of things kicks in. Because I don't think it would be a good idea to have a water wheel and a geyser right in front of your house. So rather than imagining what these guys look like, or I'm just going to bring my reference, lower the opacity a little bit, and try to manipulate the image. Yeah, I know that concept artists, they use this photo bashing technique. They use it mainly to make a whole painting out of it, but I just rather to go in and outline rather than making a whole painting out of it. It would be a great portfolio piece if you could make both the concept and also the environment. Part of my job is also not just to make the stuff in 3D, but also you have a little bit of license to experiment while you do this work. That's what I like this profession. Is like you could also be a concept artist in a way. Okay, so next part is to embellish the surroundings. I think it would be cool to have geysers around it. I'm just gonna frame the house. Bring the opacity down, maybe delete around just enough. Now I'm looking for reference of geysers and these funky looking terraces, and try to frame maybe half on both sides. Bring the opacity down so I can paint over. And maybe I think this will look cooler if the water wheel was on top and then have a bunch of terraces coming down. And so at this point, really not doing anything other than just tracing over images. All I care is the perspective that these pieces that I'm bringing in have some sort of perspective. For example, the thing on the left is looking straight at the camera, and the thing on the right, it's sideways looking at the camera, which kind of helps sell that perspective. And fast forward in time, I already added some foreground elements and background elements. If you're just doing the sketch, I think that's a little bit too overkill, but me, I like to develop more the idea and get a feel by adding colors and shadows. I think having always a foreground, middle ground, and background, and having different values for each will give a sense of depth to the painting. In this case, for example, the foreground will be darker in color, the middle ground, which is the house, and the focal point for me will be a little bit more in the brighter side. And the background, the trees, will be somewhat darker than the sky. All right, so let's bring in some shadows, more or less what I think the shadows would be if the sun was on top of it. Basically, the deck, underneath the deck, inside of that, the deck area. Anything that has ambient occlusion probably will be a good idea to have the darker side. Just going around adding some values here and there. Adding some highlights on my foreground elements. I think it make things look a little bit more 3D if you are at those three values. And if you're showing this to your supervisor, he can get an idea of what you're trying to achieve. And on this point, I'm just trying to wrap it up by adding a few more details here and there, a bit more highlights for the foreground elements. And a few more highlights for like terraces. And I'm trying to frame it by adding a little bit of more darks here and there. Adding some highlights or clouds. And finally, I'm just going to add some wet spots, water dripping here and there, and making the place feel alive by adding just some water dripping as if it was moving. Right, so as you can see, I don't have all of the house elements figured out yet. It's because I haven't figured it out. As I've been doing this as I go, so either I'm gonna have to come back and do this, or just jump into 3D and start blocking out this whole house. I guess I'll figure the rest as I go. Right, fast forward in time, and I've figured something to add there just so it looks a little bit more presentable. And just adding the last subtle details just to make it look like, hey, this is toxic. There's a lot of acid and bubbles. And finally, I'm adding some atmospheric perspective to my painting. I don't know why, but just saying atmospheric perspective makes me feel a bit smart. And removing some of that fog. I guess the concept is that objects at distance, they tend to lose contrast and sharpness due to the atmosphere or fog in the air. And finally, signing. So as you can see, I went over the sketch pretty fast and loose. I even use the same brush for all the process. It goes to show you that you don't need math concept art skills for this. I mean, you may approach the idea or process differently, but the point is to dedicate as much time to the foundation of your project as you will for the next steps, as this is the part that it's often overlooked. All right, so I hope you enjoy this tutorial, and I will see you in the next part, which is modeling in Maya and blocking out.